I used to believe that love could bridge any gap, even the deep social chasms of class and privilege. I was wrong. My name is Nathan Foster, and for 8 years I was married to Vanessa Blackwood, heiress to one of Boston's oldest and wealthiest families. This is the story of how I lost myself trying to fit into their world, and how I finally found myself again when everything fell apart. The first time I saw Vanessa was through my camera lens. I was showcasing my documentary series on blue-collar workers at a small gallery in Cambridge. She stood out immediately, not just because of her elegant cashmere coat or the pearl earrings that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but because she was actually looking at my photographs. Really looking, not just glancing and moving on like most of the cocktail-sipping crowd. She lingered in front of a black and white portrait of an aging fisherman, his face weathered by decades at sea. "You've captured his dignity," she said, not turning around. She knew I was watching her. "That's exactly what I was trying to show," I replied, surprised by her perception. "Everyone else sees his poverty. You saw his humanity." When she finally turned to face me, I felt something shift in the world. Vanessa Blackwood had eyes that changed color depending on the light, sometimes gray, sometimes blue, always penetrating. She asked questions about my technique, my inspiration, my subjects. Not once did she ask about the commercial value or who else had purchased my works, the typical questions from wealthy art collectors. We talked until the gallery closed and somehow ended up at a 24-hour diner where she ate pancakes at midnight, maple syrup dripping onto her silk blouse without her caring. "My mother would have a coronary seeing me eat like this," she laughed. That should have been my first clue. Vanessa was rebelling when she chose me. I just didn't realize I was her form of rebellion. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Weekend trips to photograph coastal villages, her surprising knowledge of obscure photography pioneers, passionate discussions about art as social commentary. When she took me to her family's historic Beacon Hill home for the first time, I thought it was just another adventure. The Blackwood mansion was something out of a period film. Original woodwork from the 1800s, paintings by artists whose works I'd only seen in museums, furniture too pristine to actually use. Eleanor Blackwood, Vanessa's mother, greeted me with a thin smile that never reached her eyes. "So you're the photographer," she said. Not a question, but an indictment. "Nathan captures the human experience in the most extraordinary way, Mother," Vanessa said, her hand protectively on my arm. "His work is being recognized in important circles." Even then, she was defending my legitimacy. I should have seen that as the warning it was. Dinner that night was my introduction to the Blackwood world. Discussions about gallery openings I hadn't been invited to, references to people I was expected to know but didn't, family jokes with contexts I couldn't possibly understand. Alexander, Alex to family only, Vanessa's brother, asked pointed questions about my business model, as if photography was a quaint little enterprise rather than my life's work and passion. "Have you considered more commercial applications?" he suggested, swirling expensive scotch in a crystal tumbler. "Wedding photography can be quite lucrative for people with your aesthetic talents." It was the first slight, carefully packaged as helpful advice. There would be thousands more. But Vanessa's hand found mine under the table, and when we left, she apologized for her family's, quote, stuffiness. "They just don't know you yet," she promised. "Once they see your talent, they'll understand." I believed her. When I proposed 6 months later, using my grandmother's modest diamond ring, Vanessa cried with joy. She didn't care that the stone was small or that the setting was outdated. Or so I thought. We were married at the Blackwood estate, a lavish affair that made me deeply uncomfortable. My small family, just my younger sister Maya, whom I'd helped raise after our parents died, was swallowed by the hundreds of Blackwood connections. But standing across from Vanessa as she promised to be my wife, I believed we were creating something new together, a bridge between our worlds. For a while, we were happy in our brownstone apartment purchased with Blackwood money, but decorated with my photographs and furnishings we chose together. Vanessa worked at the family gallery but talked about opening a space dedicated to emerging artists. I continued my documentary work, traveling occasionally for assignments. But gradually, the Blackwood gravity began to pull at her. Sunday dinners at the family mansion became obligatory. Eleanor's calls grew more frequent, always with some emergency at the gallery that required Vanessa's attention. And Alex was always there, reminding Vanessa of her, quote, responsibilities to the family legacy. The comments started small. "Nathan, dear, have you considered getting a proper studio?" Eleanor would ask over cocktails. "Working from home seems so temporary." Or "Alex, examining one of my prints. Interesting choice. Very accessible." Of course, the Blackwood Gallery focuses on more elevated aesthetics. They were paper cuts, small, painful, bloodless wounds that accumulated over time. Vanessa defended me at first. "Nathan's work has integrity, mother. Not everything needs to match the furniture." But gradually, her defenses weakened. The real trouble began when my documentary on homeless veterans received critical acclaim. A prestigious journal wanted to profile me. The day the interview was scheduled, Eleanor called Vanessa in tears about some crisis at the gallery. The profile was postponed, then mysteriously canceled. "These publications are so fickle," Vanessa said, not quite meeting my eyes. Later, I discovered Eleanor had called in a favor to kill the story, claiming my association would, quote, dilute the Blackwood brand. The Blackwood Foundation announced a major exhibition called Artistic Dynasties, showcasing multi-generational artistic families. Despite my growing reputation, I wasn't included. "It's about families with artistic histories, darling," Vanessa explained. "You're just beginning to establish yourself." The message was clear. I wasn't part of their dynasty. I was an interloper. At the exhibition opening, I stood alone, watching Vanessa laugh with her mother and brother, champagne flute in hand, completely in her element. A collector I recognized approached me. "Shame none of your work is included, Foster. But I suppose the Blackwoods have to maintain certain standards." That night, I told Vanessa how excluded I felt. "You're being oversensitive," she sighed. "Not everything is about you." But it wasn't just my imagination. At a subsequent gala, another event where I was clearly an afterthought, I overheard Alex talking to a museum director. "Vanessa's phase with the photographer is temporary," he said confidentially. "She'll come to her senses eventually. The Blackwood name has standards to maintain." When I confronted Vanessa later, she dismissed it. "Alex is just protective. You know how families are." But I was beginning to understand exactly how the Blackwood family was. Things deteriorated rapidly after that. Vanessa began suggesting I change my style to be, quote, more marketable. What she meant was more palatable to the Blackwood sensibilities. She grew distant when I refused. Our conversations became arguments, our intimacy replaced by politeness. Have you ever felt yourself disappearing within your own life? That's how it was. I was vanishing, becoming a shadow in the brilliance of the Blackwood legacy. I tried harder to fit in, to understand their world, but the harder I tried, the more they seemed to resent my efforts as presumptuous. 8 years into our marriage, I was taking fewer assignments, questioning my artistic instincts, and becoming someone I didn't recognize. The breaking point came suddenly, though in retrospect, it had been building for years. I was using Vanessa's laptop to edit some photos when an email notification appeared. The subject line caught my attention. Nathan situation. Implementing plan. It was from Alex. My hands shook as I opened it. Glad you've come around. The plagiarism story is ready to plant. We've found a Venezuelan photographer with similar composition style. Mother is making calls to have questions raised about Nathan's, quote, sudden inspiration. Once his credibility is damaged, the position at the gallery will be his only option. Either he accepts our control or we push him out completely. Deadline for your answer is Friday. There was more, much more, going back months. Vanessa had been hesitant at first, but was now actively participating in their scheme. They were going to destroy my career, my reputation, everything I'd worked for since picking up a camera at 16. I waited until evening, the email printed and sitting on our dining table when Vanessa returned home. "What is this?" she asked, though her pale face told me she already knew. "Were you going through my emails?" That was her first concern. Not that she'd been caught plotting against her husband, but that her privacy had been violated. "Were you going to let them do this to me?" I asked, my voice eerily calm despite the hurricane inside me. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," she said, her composure cracking. "The Blackwood name means something, Nathan. We have responsibilities. If you would just compromise a little." Compromise. I laughed, a hollow sound. Is that what you call letting your family destroy my career? Framing me for plagiarism? It wouldn't have come to that if you'd just accepted the position at the gallery, she cried. Alex was going to give you a real title and office. You could still take photographs, just appropriate ones. Appropriate to whom? I asked. To the precious Blackwood legacy? We argued for hours. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. Vanessa, do you want this marriage? Do you want me the real me, not some Blackwood-approved version? Her hesitation was my answer. I packed that night, my cameras, my hard drives, my father's journal, photos of Maya and my parents. 8 years of marriage reduced to a duffel bag and a camera case. As I headed for the door, Vanessa grabbed my arm. Nathan, please, where will you go? What will people say? Even then, her concern was for appearances. They'll say you finally came to your senses, I replied, echoing Alex's words. The phase is over. Have you ever had to completely rebuild your life after betrayal? To look at everything you thought was real and realize it was largely an illusion? As I drove away from Boston that night, I felt both devastated and strangely liberated. I headed west without a clear destination, just away from the Blackwoods and their suffocating world. I ended up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, about as different from Beacon Hill as one could get. I found a tiny adobe house to rent on the outskirts of the artistic community. Nobody knew me there. Nobody cared about the Blackwood name or legacy. For weeks, I could barely touch my camera. Every time I picked it up, I heard Eleanor's voice calling my work quaint, or Alex suggesting more commercial applications. The betrayal had infected even my relationship with photography. I took mundane jobs photographing tourists in the plaza to pay rent. I was a ghost, moving through life, just going through the motions. One afternoon, I found myself at the local animal shelter, drawn in by a sign advertising a pet photography fundraiser. That's where I met Oscar, a mixed-breed dog with one brown ear and one white one, abandoned and as lost as I was. Something in his mismatched appearance and wary eyes connected with me. I adopted him that day. Oscar became my reason to get out of bed. Our long walks in the desert landscape slowly reawakened my eye for beauty. I began bringing my camera, capturing the interplay of light on the mesas, the texture of ancient petroglyphs, the dignity of the local people. Gradually, I began to rediscover my voice as a photographer. I made cautious friendships with local artists who knew nothing of my past. Maria, a weaver whose studio was down the street, introduced me to others in the community. Unlike the Blackwoods, they weren't impressed by names or pedigrees, only by authenticity and craft. For 6 months, I began to heal. I started a new documentary series capturing the intersection of ancient and modern in the Southwest. For the first time in years, I was creating without second-guessing myself. Then, like a poison slowly working its way back into my system, the Blackwoods reappeared in my life. An exhibition in Santa Fe had expressed interest in my new work, then suddenly withdrew the offer without explanation. It happened again with a gallery in Taos. Finally, an honest gallery owner admitted the truth. Someone was making calls, suggesting my work was problematic and that I was mentally unstable following my divorce. Alex was still hunting me, using the Blackwood network of connections to ensure I couldn't rebuild my career. Worse, I discovered through an old colleague that the Blackwoods were claiming ownership of a series one had photographed during my marriage, intimate portraits of rural American life that were now gaining recognition. According to their lawyers, as Vanessa had been my spouse and I had occasionally used Blackwood resources, a ridiculous claim, the intellectual property could be claimed by the Blackwood Foundation. I stood in my tiny adobe house, looking at the cameras that had been extensions of my vision since I was a teenager, and faced a choice. I could walk away completely, change my name, abandon photography, disappear, or I could fight. That night, I sat with Oscar on my porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades no camera could fully capture. I thought about all the people I had photographed over the years, the fishermen, the factory workers, the street vendors, people with little power but immense dignity, people who faced struggles far greater than mine, with courage and resilience. What message would I be sending to them if I let the Blackwoods erase me? Oscar nudged my hand with his mismatched ears perked up, as if saying, "We don't run, we stand." I decided to fight, not for revenge, but for truth. Maria introduced me to Luisa Espinoza, an art lawyer who had taken on powerful galleries before. Together, we began gathering evidence of the Blackwoods' systematic campaign against me. What we found went far beyond my situation. The Blackwood Foundation had a history of exploiting emerging artists, claiming partial ownership of works they had merely displayed, manipulating grant processes to control artists' careers, and blackballing those who challenged them. With Luisa's guidance, I created a digital exhibition called Shadows of Legacy. On the surface, it was a photographic exploration of power and art in America. But embedded within were documented instances of the Blackwoods' unethical practices, paired with statements from artists they had exploited. I included evidence of their campaign against me, but my story was just one thread in a larger tapestry of manipulation. When the exhibition opened online, it went viral in the art world. Established critics began asking questions. Artists came forward with their own Blackwood stories. Donors to the foundation demanded investigations. The carefully constructed Blackwood image began to crumble. I didn't feel the victory I had expected. Instead, I felt a quiet sadness for the wasted years and unnecessary cruelty. 3 weeks after the exhibition launched, Vanessa called. "We need to talk," she said, her voice missing the confident Blackwood tone I remembered. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between Santa Fe and Albuquerque. She looked thinner, the designer clothes hanging loosely on her frame, dark circles under her color-changing eyes. "You've destroyed my family," she said as she sat down. "The foundation is losing donors, the gallery is being investigated for tax irregularities, and Mother had to step down from 3 museum boards." "Your family was destroying itself long before I came along," I replied. "I just pulled back the curtain." "We could have worked something out," she insisted, "if you'd just been reasonable." "Reasonable?" I interrupted. "Was it reasonable to plan to frame me for plagiarism, to blackball me across the country, to try to steal my work?" She looked down. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. Alex got carried away." Always deflecting, never taking responsibility. The Blackwood way. "What do you want, Vanessa?" I asked. "The foundation lawyers think we can reach a settlement," she said. "We'll acknowledge your ownership of the disputed photographs, issue a public statement clearing your name professionally, and provide financial compensation. In return, you take down the exhibition and sign an NDA. "And what do you want?" I asked again. She looked up, surprised by the question. I don't know anymore. When you left, I thought you'd come back once you calmed down. When you didn't, I was angry. Then, when this exhibition happened..." She trailed off. "I don't recognize my life anymore." For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the woman I had fallen in love with. Uncertain, authentic, human. But it vanished quickly behind the Blackwood veneer. "We could try again," she suggested, "without my family's interference this time." Looking at her, I felt nothing but a distant sadness. No hatred, no love, not even anger anymore. Just recognition that we had both been playing parts in a story that was never really ours. "No, Vanessa, we can't go back. I'm not the same person, and neither are you." I stood up to leave, then paused. "I hope someday you figure out who you are beyond the Blackwood name. It's worth finding out." The legal issues were settled eventually. I retained ownership of all my work, and the Blackwoods issued a carefully worded statement about misunderstandings and, quote, regrettable actions. The exhibition remained online as a historical document, though without the Blackwood name explicitly mentioned, a compromise Luisa negotiated skillfully. My life settled into a new pattern. My work began receiving the recognition it deserved on its own merits. I established a small gallery in Santa Fe, showcasing documentary photographers focusing on marginalized communities. Maya visited often, bringing her new husband and their baby daughter, who loved Oscar's mismatched ears. I found myself surrounded by people who valued authenticity over pedigree, creativity over conformity, and kindness over power. 6 months after my meeting with Vanessa, I hosted a small gallery showing of my latest work, a series called Abandoned Beauty, capturing forgotten places reclaimed by nature and human resilience. As I looked around at the unpretentious gathering of artists, locals, and friends, I realized that true success wasn't measured by prestigious names attached to your work or acceptance by elite circles. It was measured by the courage to remain authentic in a world that rewards conformity. The Blackwoods had tried to remake me in their image, and when I refused, they tried to destroy me. But in the attempt, they had inadvertently given me the greatest gift, the return to myself. Have you found your authentic voice after someone tried to silence you? I hope you have, or that you will. Because in the end, that's the only victory that truly matters. Not revenge, not vindication, but the quiet knowledge that you remained true to yourself when it would have been easier to disappear. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of personal triumph over adversity. Because sometimes the most powerful act of rebellion is simply refusing to become a shadow of someone else's expectations.